So now we're on a different level of court system, right? That's Texas. So it's kind of the same with the legislatures. There's kind of a federal legislature and then there's a state legislature. Same for court systems. So there's the federal system and then there's Texas courts. And Texas courts handle different kinds of law. So federal law, this is an overgeneralization, but typically federal courts deal with federal law. So the statutory law that's made there, federal courts interpret that federal statutory law. That's an overgeneralization, but for right now, that's one way of thinking about it. And Texas courts, they handle Texas law, so they handle the cases that deal with interpretation of Texas law. I'm not really comfortable with these overgeneralizations, but that's one way of explaining it. This is a chart that shows the court structure of Texas, and you can go to the link and actually look at it. Maybe a better way of accessing it because it is so tiny, the print. I think if I blow it up, the resolution is very good. So when we're in class, I'll actually click out to and we can look at it. Similarly, it has a Supreme Court and a Court of Appeals and district courts. But in Texas, and this isn't true of all states, we also have county level courts, justice courts, and municipal courts. And we also have a Court of Criminal Appeals that handles criminal. Now, I will say I've had people in this class who are very interested in criminal law, and so sometimes we'll take a look at criminal law, or they have a background in criminal law. But generally, I don't have a background in criminal law, and I know very little about it. I took it in law school. I know a little bit about criminal procedure. There are similarities and there's differences. And so if you have any questions about that, please ask. The answers are going to be a little bit different if you're dealing with criminal law. And there's reasons for the differences, but it's all fascinating. I mean, I really like studying this kind of stuff. So while you still have that sort of appellate level and district court trial level, county level courts are trial level courts, and so are municipal courts and justice courts. And they are based on, and I'm not an expert at this, it is very confusing. It's based on the type of complaint at issue, so the type of law that's being dealt with, and also the amount in controversy. And that is the sort of amount that you're claiming in your lawsuit. We'll talk about how lawsuits work and the levels of the lawsuits for another class. So this is the basics of what you'll be learning, is all of this stuff, just so you can have that structure, that basis behind finding the different parts of the law. So jurisdiction, this is a concept that you kind of have, in order to find the law, you have one of the questions in the reference interview when you deal with law, maybe what is the jurisdiction? Because where you find the products of that law or the law in that area they're by jurisdiction. So you kind of have to understand what jurisdiction is. So jurisdiction basically means who has the authority. So this can mean a couple of different things. So it can mean state or federal. So is this state or federal that you need this answer in? And sometimes you don't know. So similar to the reference question that we already had about what the ordinance is. So, or the question about animal rights, like keeping the animals. You don't know if federal law applies, state law applies, or it's a local matter, so that it's a city ordinance. And sometimes all three may apply. So you may have to go to all three levels, and that's pretty common. There are some types of law that are exclusively federal and some types of law that are exclusively state. That, it's really hard. There's a lot of generalizations you have to make when you're teaching sort of the basics, but you'll realize that everything has exceptions and it's much more complicated when you're in practice. And there's lots of things for people to write about. Legal scholarship, there's there's just hundreds of things you could write about all of this stuff, and people do. That's what law professors do. So it's state or federal. So some types of law are usually federal, some are usually state. What geographic area, so which state it is, or which federal circuit it's in. And then it can be other, so it could be city, county, could be an agency has the jurisdiction, and it could be that could be state or federal, and it could also be a private organization that has jurisdiction, which is a really weird thing. But we have lots of private organizations that are self-policing and that police different types of behaviors. So you have the best example is securities exchanges. The securities industry polices itself. The federal government and federal agencies police it as well, but they have their own rules and they are self-policing, and that's true of other fields as well. So which court? So I mentioned before the amounts in controversy. So if it's say a state court matter and there's less in controversy, it might be, I mean, we're all familiar. I've never actually been, so I'm not that familiar with, oh God, I'm drawing a blank. Oh, it's like low dollar money. Like, oh gosh, I can't believe it. I'm gonna have to redo this slide. It's a petty court. Oh God, what am I? Oh, okay, you're just gonna know it, and I can't think of it. Can't think of the word. I think I'm going crazy, or I'm just getting old. And then what geographic area, and then what type of law. So in Texas we have, and probably other states have this too, I'm sure they do. They have probate courts. So a probate court just handles matters of probate, which is when you have someone dies and they have a will, it has to be probated. So that's a very specific probate court. Now you say, well, all these different kinds of courts. Well, they're generally all in one building, like at a county level, like Travis County on Guadalupe. It's like a courthouse, right? Well, there'll be like different rooms. So the probate court will be in a different room, and the different county and they're in different rooms. So it's not like they're different buildings, which is something good to know. And then family court is a separate thing as well. It's just in another room. And then whether it's civil or criminal. So you kind of have to know all of these different, and as librarians we're kind of into that because we like cubby holes, we like organization, so we like organizing things by type. This should be good for us to know this idea of jurisdiction, and there are overlapping jurisdictions. Case law. So case law, it's got a lot of different names. It could be called legal opinions, case decisions, case law. There are probably other words I'm not thinking right now. These are sort of the final opinion that the judge or a panel of judges has written about an issue, and it is considered the law. That's not always true. So at the highest level, it is considered the law. And there are what's called precedential decisions and non-precedential decisions. And the non-precedential decisions, it's questionable whether those are really law. We'll get into that in a little bit. But just generally, this case law is the law. And this is sort of the end result of a lawsuit. We'll get, at the very end, there'll be a decision, and it'll be made in writing. And in that writing, there'll be what's called a holding. So that is the decision, the final decision. It's usually very short, couple sentences, and that is the part of it that is the law. And then all this other stuff around it is the explanation of how the judges made it to that part. And there'll be lots of authority in there. And we're going to look at these opinions and sort of take them apart and try to understand them. So what are the products of the judicial system? There's that end product, right? That's what gets reported. Okay, so those are decisions, the final decisions. and then what's called final interlocutory opinions. And I heard this term and I knew what it meant, but I could never define it. And finally, I was like, okay, what's the definition? I think I looked it up. Those are the results of motions made by the parties, and a motion is something in writing, which is basically a request to the judge. And that's things that end the litigation. So those motions that end the litigation before that final decision is reached. So sometimes the parties can make a request to end the litigation early, and sometimes that's granted, and there's a decision, there's a opinion that's written at that point. And so those can get reported. So there's other things that are not case law, but they are judicial products that you'll be asked to find, and you have to know where they're located and what they look like. And that's dockets. A docket is basically a list of all of the written filings that are filed in a case, which are all the written requests or motions filed by the different parties' attorneys, and then all of the orders. And then it also has information about the hearings that are set. That's a docket. And then there's case filings, which are those filings themselves. And then there's trial transcripts, which you only get to if you have a trial. And everybody thinks that these are really like a handy tool, but trial transcripts are rare because you rarely get to trial. And then once you get to trial, the transcripts are only made if it's appealed. So here's a picture of the some law books that are, it's like a set of law books, and these would contain the case law for South Africa. So that's what those look like. So thanks.